Australia, the world's most isolated continent. According to the Aboriginals here, it is the setting of this dream called life, from which only death can awaken us. This man is searching for the dinosaurs of the plant world. His hunting ground is the island continent, a true Jurassic Park where motionless giants belonging to species several hundred million years old have survived, unknown to the world. Every day for more than 20 years, Robert Koyman has looked for a tree with roots that reach back to prehistoric times. Sometimes the clues he must collect, such as leaves, fruit, and twigs, can only be found at inaccessible heights. Koyman doesn't always need his slingshot. He can use more traditional techniques instead. Some potentially informative plant specimens can be caught in the mesh of a net set a few days earlier. A leaf plucked from a branch by the wind or a seed dropped by a bird in flight could easily turn Koyman's life upside down. Because if a leaf or seed he finds has never been cataloged, it could mean that a species of dinosaur plant has survived for thousands of years, deep in the heart of a lost valley. Robert Koyman knows that he's seeking no less than the equivalent of a Tyrannosaurus with roots, branches, and leaves. A crazy dream.
Whenever I run into something that I can't actually identify immediately, I get excited because it's potentially going to add to my knowledge, my understanding, and it may yet turn out to be a new species.
Every evening, Koyman examines the day's harvest. More often than not, this is a moment of disillusionment. One promising shoot turns out to be nothing more than plain old grass. A strange leaf is just an ordinary variant of a species already well known to botanists. Pursuing new species is a challenge. Hoping to find one that dates back to prehistory is madness. However, if there were a place anywhere on this planet where such a species could have thrived, it would surely be this island, separated long ago from the rest of the world like a raft adrift at sea. Long forgotten, sheltered, and remote, the last of the continents was safe from the curiosity and destructive tendencies of humans. In the beginning, a southern supercontinent called Gondwana was held together in a single landmass that later divided, forming South America, Africa, Arabia, Madagascar, India, New Zealand, Australia, and the Antarctic, as well as certain parts of southern Asia. About 50 million years ago, Australia detached itself from this landmass and evolved separately, becoming a kind of sanctuary where life forms were protected and forged new and distinct paths. This is why in Australia, the land of the sacred rock, creatures like the Varanus lizard or the estuary crocodile can be found. They roamed this land in the days of the dinosaurs 200 million years ago, even before it drifted away from its own continent. They are still here, and their shape and behavior have remained stable. The echidna is like a small living bush with light-colored spines and a pointed nose. It is found only in Australia and New Guinea. If these antediluvian species could survive here, why not a dinosaur tree? The Australian forests are located mainly in the northern subtropical regions and along the eastern coast. Robert Koyman does his field research mainly in the unexplored region of New South Wales.
climate change through millions of years has had a profound impact on this continent, and that the species that were adapted to the rainforest, the cool, moist climates, have now retreated to these gorges, the deep valleys, the high, steep mountain slopes.
Koyman dreams of finding living traces of a distant past in the depths of these valleys. But it was not he who exhumed fossilized traces of this history. The botanist finds it's crucial to understand what the ghost he is pursuing might have really looked like, which he can do with the help of these fossils. This is the Melbourne Museum. Robert Koyman's hunch is based on evidence provided by the objects contained here, in these cabinets from which they are almost never removed. Tom Dara, a paleobotanist, has been studying these fossils for many years. The fossils are shaped like large spheres, the size of cricket balls. They are fruit, which could be among the first produced by a tree on this continent. Koyman is searching for a tree whose branches bore these kind of fruit 15 or 20 million years ago. The history of these fossils dates back to the 19th century, when a gold rush attracted a crowd of adventurers to Ballarat, a city near Melbourne, on the furthest peaks of the Great Dividing Range. This is a dramatization of the day in 1875 when a gold miner discovered a fossilized nut in the depths of a mine. This discovery might have been overlooked in the excitement of the times, except that a scientist, Ferdinand von Mueller, was informed. Mueller was the official botanist of the government for 43 years. He indexed and dated the relic and named it Xylocaryon lucky. Finding a living tree similar to the one that bore the nuts given to von Mueller is Robert Koyman's steadfast objective. The botanist takes up his search again on today's hunting ground, Nightcap National Park. The park is located on a volcanic chain, gouged by erosion, forming the wet and sheltered valleys that Koyman knows are ideal for his search. Two other favorable conditions here are the high rate of biodiversity and the acidic soil. A former ranger, Koyman is familiar with every inch of these forests. Nothing out of the ordinary escapes him. Now he enjoys taking the same steps he did on the day in 1988 that could have changed his life. First, he finds the leaf with the well-defined, deeply indented lobes. Then he calmly makes notes of his adventures in his journal. And following the same protocol as usual, he collects the data and preserves his specimens. On this day, Koyman thinks he might have reached the goal that he had set for himself so long ago. He doesn't remember ever seeing this leaf before, except on the extinct species list. To make sure, he decides to send his treasure to the person he trusts most, his mentor, Alex Floyd, a botanist who specializes in tropical forests. Floyd sends the specimen for analysis to the prestigious Queensland Herbarium in Brisbane. At the end of a long process of comparison with all known plant species, the herbarium directors finally declare that the leaf provided by Robert Koyman is of no particular interest. The tree to which it belongs has already been duly indexed. Apparently, it belongs to the Corinocarpaceae family. The official herbarium botanist dismissed the case and turned to more important tasks. Actually, they've just made a mistake. Koyman resigns himself to thinking he had taken a wrong path.
Probably one of the best comparisons that we could make in terms of giving people an understanding of what it is to do science, and particularly natural sciences and botany, is this collection of evidence which has strong parallels with forensic science and detective work.
Disappointed but not discouraged, Koyman sets out again for the volcanic flanks of Nightcap National Park, where we met up with him in the year 2000. More than ever, he considers his task essential to better understanding the great evolutionary principles of the plant world. In the wake of Darwin, we've been continually obsessed with analyzing the mechanisms of natural selection, or survival of the fittest, in the animal world. An archaeologist of the plant world, Koyman believes it is now time to decipher the same mechanisms that control vegetation, whose evolution is not as familiar to us. The process of plant reproduction in particular has undergone successive revolutions. What drives Koyman is the desire to better understand why, beginning with the Ferns' simple reproductive system, evolution has tended toward increasing complexity. And the dinosaur tree, which he has been seeking for so long, could give invaluable clues as to the stages of this progression. Ferns dominated the so-called Carboniferous period for more than 300 million years. Though without trunks, some of them reach nearly 30 meters in height. To attain this height and push beyond the vast ground mosses, this plant had to invent the stem. Ferns no longer dominate the Australian landscape, but they have survived there and everywhere else in the world since the days when the Diplodocus and the iguanodons roamed the plains. For Koyman, they are proof that some plants have been able to travel in time from the dinosaur age to the present day.
The underside of the frond are the sporangia, which of course are concentrations of spores, which of course is how these plants reproduce.
The ferns carry neither flower, nor fruit, nor seed. Their mode of reproduction is as basic as can be. Tiny particles, or spores, are released upon the slightest contact, the lightest breeze. Once they have fallen to the ground, if the humidity and temperature conditions are favorable, they will sprout small organisms in just a few days. These gametophytes will in turn generate new ferns. Week after week, year after year, Robert Koyman continues his never-ending quest in the same area. He knows that in the highlands north of Queensland, there is a forest not unlike this one, which contains indisputable Gondwanic vestiges inherited from the original supercontinent. So why wouldn't the forest of Nightcap also contain plants that could be traced back to the genesis of this land? Yes, this is definitely the place to look for them. Sometimes the botanist is afraid he will pass by the tree he is looking for without seeing it, because here, one tree could be hiding another. The strangler fig is a good example. Its seed, carried randomly via bird excrement or the wind, will attach itself to a tree trunk and sprout there. A vine grows down to the ground and takes root. Then, the parasitic plant develops tentacles on all sides, wrapping itself around its host and making it invisible. The tree that Koyman seeks could be hidden beneath the limbs of this strangler fig. To find samples that will verify this, he must take risks. At this stage, Koyman can assume that he has failed. His research hasn't led anywhere. The botanist has scoured the same zones 100 times without success. Sometimes he remembers the day in 1988 when he thought he had reached his goal. Sometimes his journeys bring him back to the foot of this young plant that had filled him with hope. He now passes it indifferently, and it seems to mock him. Suddenly, destiny itself mocks Koyman. Another man beats him to the discovery of the first living relic of prehistoric Australian vegetation. And this man is not even a botanist. David Noble is a national park ranger and a passionate climber, which gives him and his companions access to crevices that Koyman wasn't able to explore. Noble takes us to the bottom of an almost inaccessible canyon in Blue Mountains National Park in New South Wales, where he found a prehistoric tree no one had ever seen before. A tree that could pass for a fern if it didn't measure 35 meters in height, and if its bark were not slightly granular. It belongs to the pine family, and they named it Wollemi Pine. The discovery is very important. The young explorer's lucky find is applauded the world over. It's as if he had found a small dinosaur roaming the planet. 38 Wollemi pines were subsequently found in the area, the oldest dating back 1,000 years.
The discovery of the Wollemi pine is very important for a number of different reasons. Firstly, it's a very ancient lineage that was thought to be extinct for a very long time, so it's a living fossil that dates back to the time of the dinosaurs. The fossil I have here is actually an ancestor for the Wollemi pine. This one comes from the centre of New South Wales. It's about 150 million years old, and the Wollemi pine itself dates from only about 100 million years, but it's quite clearly the ancestor of these. We can tell that the conifers have not changed a great deal over a very long time, and that shows that they are very well adapted to the conditions and that they don't need to change very much.
Ken Hill, the botanist at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney, who identified the plant, is quite right. The Wollemi pine is a living fossil. Soon after the discovery is made public, there are fears that curious onlookers will destroy the site. The authorities decide not to reveal its location. The few people who have authorized access to the site are blindfolded and flown in by helicopter. These images, the only ones in existence, were filmed by a ranger. Since then, access to the valley of the Wollemi Pines has been strictly prohibited. There is another threat to this part of the forest. It is feared that traffickers could cross the lines of protection to collect Wollemi Pine seeds, whose value could reach thousands of dollars. That's why scientists are in a race against time. They must analyze the reproductive process of the Wollemi Pines as soon as possible. If they found a way to cultivate the tree in greenhouses, they could kill the market before it developed. The Wollemi Pine is bisexual. Both male and female reproductive cones are found on its top branches. They can be collected by spreading nets, but it's sometimes necessary to use other means to reach the treetops. At the Mount Tomah Botanic Gardens, the cool climate annex of the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney, the researchers take great precautions. They disinfect their shoes and use barbed wire to ward off intruders. This is where 12 Wollemi pines are being cultivated, the first to be grown by human hands. They were obtained by cuttings, the method selected to propagate this extremely rare tree. The young trees are coddled and fussed over every moment of the day. Their growth is monitored, and they are tested for their ability to cope with the creature that now dominates the world in place of the dinosaur, man. The plan is to put the plant on the market in 2005. And to satisfy the curiosity of the public, an authentic Wollemi pine was transplanted from its original valley to the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney, where it has become a real star.
The discovery of the Wollemi pine, of course, was a really fascinating episode, and not least because the discovery was so close to Sydney, a huge urban area. So for something to come out of the past, out of the age of the dinosaurs, so to speak, and still be alive and living undiscovered so close to a large urban setting was, I think, really exciting.
Instead of feeling discouraged, Robert Koyman is further motivated by his defeat. Indeed, if a ranger and amateur climber like Noble could discover a living fossil, then the botanist's hypotheses must not have been so absurd after all. Those who claim that dinosaur trees can be found in Australia are not just dreaming, and Koyman has another ambition. He wants to discover one of the first, if not the first, fruit tree that has adopted a revolutionary reproductive system.
This is the hoop pine. It's a close relative of the Wollemi pine, and it's actually a gymnosperm, which means, of course, that it has the cones, and it predates or came long before the flowering plants evolved. Gymnosperm, roughly translated, means naked seed. So essentially, the cones themselves, the seeds are exposed. They're not covered and protected. The two types of trees are really come down to the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. And the gymnosperms are really characterised by pines and species that have cones like the Araucaria that's behind us.
The Wollemi pine is a gymnosperm, which means that, like all conifers, it belongs to a species with a rudimentary reproductive system. The branches carry both male and female flowers or pine cones. When the male cones open, they disperse pollen that fertilizes the ovules, which are located at the base of the female cone scales. Thus, the zygotes or seeds are produced and disseminated by the wind. The significance of this is that both the ovules and the seeds are naked and exposed to the air. They are not protected by an ovarian cavity. What interests Robert Koyman most of all, and guides his quest, are the major stages of plant evolution. One of the most extraordinary steps was taken when a flower blossomed on a tree branch for the first time. That was a true revolution.
The flowering plants are well known, and flowering trees are well known to most people because of their large, overt flowering behaviour, and of course they now dominate. But there was a time way back when, of course, when these plants, when the Gymnosperms dominated the planet's forests, and only later did the flowering plants begin to dominate during their era.
Koyman dreams of discovering one of the first angiosperm trees, one that is still alive. In evolutionary terms, the appearance of angiosperms was a magical moment. Some plants started keeping their ovules in an ovary, sheltered within the heart of the flower, instead of abandoning them naked and vulnerable to the mercy of the winds. From that point onward, one can almost say that the plant was protecting its offspring in order to give it a better chance of survival. Botanist Marfa Telepova at the National Museum of Natural History in Paris dissects an orchid, one of the most advanced organisms of the plant world. Under the microscope, the flower ovaries can be seen. They provide a real sanctuary for the ovule. The angiosperm reproductive system also makes it possible for these plants to diversify because it allows for a higher increase of genetic combinations.
The flowering plants, the angiosperms, attract in insects, birds, bats, and a whole range of other species to assist their reproductive processes.
In the year 2000, more than 250,000 species of angiosperms had been identified. But there were only 700 gymnosperms. Benefiting from greater diversity, flowering plants have been able to colonize many different areas. They have conquered deserts and savannas, jungles and tundras, all thanks to the miraculous creation of flowers and therefore fruit as well. Noble's discovery of a living prehistoric gymnosperm strengthens Koiman's willpower. Koiman intends to be the one to discover a living prehistoric angiosperm, one of the trees that invented the flower and fruit. But everything has become more complicated. Rapidly spreading urbanization has razed entire forests to the ground. It's necessary to venture deeper and deeper into the backcountry, which is only accessible by helicopter. Some of the most devastating fires in history started at the junction of the 20th and 21st centuries, and they are further reducing the space reserved for old-growth forests.
A lot of the work we do now in biology and ecology and plant biology, of course, in particular, has to do with just those factors, measuring the impacts of humans on the environment. A lot of what we do is tied into trying to recover or to assist the survival of species. And of course, there is a great race on to try to find, to locate, to identify as many species as we can before they disappear.
Koiman's great fear is that the tree he has sought for more than 20 years could well have been simply burned or cut down by humans without even having been identified. Time is now his enemy. The botanist sets out again on his expedition. He systematically divides these deep forests into squares where he might find his forgotten tree, hidden under a thick chlorophyll canopy. Again, he follows the routine of taking samples. The search does not end. But has Koiman adopted the correct method? A few years ago, others seeking ancient species didn't set out at random. On the contrary, they adopted the detective's approach. In 1960, in a virgin forest in Queensland, botanist Bernie Hyland found fresh nuts similar to the fossils that had been discovered at the bottom of a mine and described by Baron von Mueller in the 19th century. When he looked around the forest, Hyland didn't find any trees that could have produced this extraordinary fruit. Having searched the slopes of Mount Bartle Frere high and low, he found no other clue other than the nuts themselves, which seemed to have fallen from the sky. At the National Herbarium in Sydney, where Peter Weston serves as Director of Research, the discovery caused a stir among the scientists. The old drawings of Ferdinand von Mueller clearly indicated that these were the same fruit. But where the devil was the tree that produced them?
These are fruits. They're gnawed by one of the local rat species, and Bernie wasn't able to get intact fruits like this one here until over 20 years later.
Hyland was not able to find fresh, intact nuts for so many years because they had been eaten, gnawed on, or moved around by frugivorous animals. One example is the kangaroo rat, a small marsupial that feeds on fruit, bark, nuts, and seeds. It belongs to a group of animal gardeners who contribute to the maintenance of the vegetation. Its excrement is rich in the spores of certain truffles that nourish tree roots, and it often disperses its food by moving it around to various hiding places. Instead of following his adventuresome spirit, Koiman could have taken these elements into account and adopted a more logical methodology, like others did.
We're now at Smythesdale, and according to the map, we have about 4 kilometres to go to the place where the fossils were found. So we'll go up to the intersection near the mine.
Calculate the distance to which the animals can move fruit, and search an equivalent area around the mine where the fossilized nuts of Baron von Mueller were found. That's what a professional detective would do. It's also the strategy used by many botanists.
I'm now standing near a large man-made mound, which is almost certainly the debris that came out of the Reform No. 6 mine shaft, which was situated next door to the Crucible mine, the mine from which Baron von Muller's fossil fruit was found. Unfortunately, in that time, there's been a lot of man-made changes, including the dumping of rubbish into old mine shafts.
Sometimes using logic does not pay off. None of the botanists who sought an angiosperm dinosaur using rational methods have attained their goals. But Robert Koiman's failure is as tangible as theirs. Coming upon the same plant he had previously thought was an extraordinary treasure, he reevaluates the perhaps hasty way in which the herbarium in Brisbane had dashed his hopes. Is it really possible to use a single leaf to determine the membership of a plant to a specific species? At the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, Marc Pignan, the director of the most beautiful herbarium in the world, proves this is not so. Here is a leaf with well-defined lobes from a young plant. And here is a leaf from an adult plant of the same type. The contour is regular with no notches. Like the first, the leaf comes from a tree that belongs to the Tiliaceae family. The leaves of the Tiliaceae plant change shape as they mature. In Australia, this characteristic is common to the trees of the Proteaceae family. At last, Robert Koiman understands that his first intuition had probably been correct. One can certainly use a leaf to identify a plant if its foliage doesn't change during its lifetime. But this is not the case with Proteaceae plants. The herbarium was perhaps mistaken. And the dinosaur tree might still be there, hidden in the heart of Nightcap National Park. The access to the park is now strictly regulated. On the path so often used by the botanist in the past, storms have knocked down some trees. The obstacles before him have multiplied. Finally, Koyman arrives at the place where 20 years earlier he had stumbled upon the strange and chiseled leaf. And though some time has passed, a similar plant seems to be waiting for him at the base of a tree. Yes, this is the same leaf that was sent to the laboratory, but nothing, neither flower nor fruit, indicates that the herbarium directors might have made an error. However, while the leaf is not convincing in itself, just one more single indicator could disprove their analysis. At first, Koyman thinks he's lost the gamble once again, but then he realizes the plant is actually an offspring of the immense tree standing in front of him, whose leaves seem slightly different. This tree is indeed a proteaceous. There is no longer any uncertainty about the herbarium's mistake. Today, although he can't prove it yet, Koyman is sure that this tree, measuring 30 meters in height, belongs to a prehistoric species.
Hello.
Back at his office,
Alex.
Koyman
It's
begins
nice to
a
hear from
dialogue
you.
with his
Did you get
friend
that
Peter
specimen?
Weston, the director of the
Good of you to
herbarium in
call.
Sydney.
Yeah, did you
Alas,
get that? It's
a hunch
definitely
is not
it's
sufficient,
Karina
and Koyman doesn't have any proof. In this season, his tree bears neither flowers nor fruit. According to the specialist, it is probably a proteaceous that has already been indexed. But a bark fragment analysis could solve the mystery. Koyman must return to the site. Ready to get down to the job again, Koyman makes a horizontal incision to remove a piece of bark from the tree. He notices that the inner part of the trunk shares a similar feature to that of the oak. This is one of the indicators he had hoped for, one that could prove this tree had never before been identified. On the ground, Koyman discovers some nuts that had previously escaped his attention. They look similar to the fossils brought to the world's attention 125 years ago by Ferdinand von Mueller. The Australian botanist no longer has any doubt he has made an extraordinary discovery. For the moment, he tries to stay calm. He collects the last samples that he requires, and he savors these moments of silence and solitude that will undoubtedly form the climax of his career. Koyman gathers the elements of proof that he now possesses. The means of communication have changed a lot since his first discovery in 1988. Scanner, email, in just a few seconds, the scientific community will be informed of his conclusions. After receiving these samples, Peter Weston can now make a categorical statement. Koiman's tree is definitely an unknown specimen of the Proteaceae family, the one to which the first flowering trees of Gondwana belonged. As with the Wollemi Pine, Koiman's discovery of the new species is resounding. Today, Peter Weston contemplates the historical error previously committed by the Herbarium in Brisbane.
In botany, it's really quite difficult to identify an unnamed plant specimen only on the basis of juvenile foliage. And here we have leaves that, juvenile leaves that Robert Koiman sent to Brisbane for identification in 1988. And as you can see, they've got quite prickly leaf margins, and it's really quite superficially similar to this specimen of a Corinocarpa species, which also has prickly leaf margins. The way science usually progresses is by scientists coming up with bold explanations, really running ahead of what we really know, and then testing those explanations by going out and actually observing the real world.
Indeed, science does seem to progress by trial and error. At the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney, the botanists analyzed the DNA of the tree that Koiman called the Nightcap Oak. They proved that it belonged to a contemporary species of plant dinosaurs, and the media celebrated the results of the persistent researcher.
First, there was the discovery of the Wollemi Pine near Sydney, and now the Nightcap Oak on the far north coast of New South Wales. A local botanist, Rob Koiman, has found a stand of trees thought to be the only ones of their kind left from the Gondwana forests, which covered Australia millions of years ago. The nuts found at the base of the tree prove that Koiman's specimen is an angiosperm, a flowering tree.
Botanist Rob Koiman stumbled
Koiman
across the
became an
trees
overnight
in a remote
celebrity,
part of the
coveted by
Nightcap
all the
National Park
cameras.
near Lismore in August.
I'd previously, 12 years ago, stumbled into a juvenile of this particular species, and there wasn't enough material of it to actually determine what it was. So this time I looked around very quickly and excitedly and actually found some adult trees.
He
The
yelled with
Nightcap
delight
Oak
after
is described as
realising
a
what he
species
found,
similar to the
a new
macadamia,
species of tree
which is
related
also
to the
called the
Waratah and
Queensland walnut
macadamia.
tree.
In all, there were some
Apparently,
20
20
plants,
Nightcap
some up
Oaks were
to
found in the
45
same
metres
area.
tall.
A bit of a time capsule. It belongs to those ancient Gondwanic forests that have once dominated the whole of Australia and have now retreated to the coolest and most moist sites.
Koiman had been right all along. His ideas were correct, and so was his intuition.
There are moments in life, if you're very lucky, that you get that joy of discovery. And that's a wonderful thing. It's indisputably one of the highs in science.
Discovery of the adult trees of the Nightcap Oak has resolved a long-standing mystery in the flora of the Nightcap Range. It's been an unanswered question for several decades, and so now we can finally say what those funny specimens were.
Soon it will be forgotten that Koiman was for so long the only one to believe in his theory. If he had been less stubborn, no one would have guessed that dinosaurs brushed against similar leaves, or that this tree invented the flower. Today, the Nightcap Oak is protected as a national treasure.
Until we know more about the species, we can't take the risk. So having discovered the species, of course, science is now attempting to learn more about it, but we also need to understand enough about it to know when we're placing it at risk.
Koiman counted 25 adult Nightcap Oaks in the same area. A little later, when the scientists returned to the secret forest, he received a deeply moving gift from the trees. The forest was filled with white blossoms.